Warren G. Harding was born in 1865 in Blooming Grove, Ohio. I know, a lot of Ohio presidents out there.
Nice.
Both of his parents were doctors, which is appropriate. Well, first off, again, it was the 19th century, so the fact that his mom was a doctor is pretty impressive. However, his mom being a doctor indirectly got him killed later down the line. I will get to that point.
There's so much to unpack there.
There's so much to unpack there. All right, so his mom got into some legal trouble because she prescribed some medication to a little boy, and he died because the medication included opiates. But another doctor, a homeopathic doctor, came to his mom's defense and explained that she was in the right. That doctor was Charles Sawyer, who was a homeopathic doctor. For those of you who don't know, homeopathics are an alternative medicine. So that essentially means instead of treating someone with medicine, they're more likely to treat them with like a unique diet or a unique relaxation program. Not
a board certified physician then.
Well, at the time it was considered somewhat legitimate. Now it is considered about as legitimate as like something Gwyneth Paltrow would put out.
Obviously.
So it's sort of like, oh, okay, so you're treating someone with kale instead of antibiotics. That's interesting. But again, Charles Sawyer will play a huge part in the life of Warren G. Harding. So the biggest moment in his young adult life, Warren G. Harding's, was that when he was 18, himself and two of his friends decided to buy a newspaper in the city of Marion, Ohio. I mean, like, what did you do when you were 18?
We tried to score cigarettes because we didn't have any money. And yeah, we would buy, because we were 18, and we would buy hand-rolled cigarettes off my buddy's mom in the trailer park for $0.25 apiece.
Well, back in the 19th century, people decided to collect their money and buy a newspaper. That was the 19th century equivalent of starting a podcast, I suppose.
Sure.
So they started the Marion Star, which, by the way, still exists to this day. The Marion Star had been a dying newspaper, and under their watch, it started to become thriving. Well, let me introduce a new and very important character to this narrative who explains why the Marion Star became thriving. Florence Harding. So, as was the case with William Howard Taft, behind every great man is probably a greater woman, in the case of our two presidents we've discussed so far. So Florence Harding, as you probably guessed from the name, did in fact become his wife, and as was the case at the time, if you wanted to be a very successful woman at the time, you generally had to work through a husband puppet. So Warren G. Harding was not a great editor of the Marion Star. However, his wife was. And so by all accounts, she was the brains of the operation. She was the much more forceful personality. He was up front being like, I'm the man who's editing this newspaper. And his wife was like, as long as I'm making all the decisions. And by all accounts, she was another thing that's going to come into place is that Warren G. Harding had been institutionalized for mental breakdowns on multiple occasions throughout his life. And whenever he was away, it was Florence who'd step up and be like, I got this. I got the newspaper thing. And all the employees said, yeah, it was her, secretly being the editor of the newspaper. However, during this time, the Marion Star was making a lot of friends in Ohio because it was not a biased newspaper. It was sort of like everyone's a winner, which was unique at the time because a lot of the time the newspapers, actually still to this day, took a political skew, whereas the Marion Star was like, everyone is awesome. Did I mention the Marion Star is still thriving? Well, not thriving, but it's still in circulation, despite the fact that newspapers aren't really a thing in the moment.
That's pretty cool.
I know. So again, maybe the Hardings were doing something right. So while this is going on, Warren G. Harding is making a lot of friends in the Republican Party in Ohio. Ohio still is an extremely important state to win. So, it's crucial to so he's continuing to make friends. He's got an interest in politics. He served for a while in the Ohio State Senate, and then he ran for governor of Ohio. A lot of our presidents that we'll be discussing tried for this route. He didn't win, but he did become a lieutenant governor. Then he ran for Senate in Ohio and actually got it. However, it is worth noting that while he was a senator, he basically accomplished nothing, which is kind of what made him stand out.
Why did that make him stand out, Pete?
Because he didn't make any enemies. So in 1914, he got elected to Senate, and he became popular for the same reason why the Marion Star became popular, which is he just kind of sat there and twiddled his thumbs.
Yeah. Sometimes it's nice to have a placeholder boss.
In 1916, he was the keynote speaker at the Republican National Convention, and they did not win that election, so maybe he didn't do a very good job. But he was starting to make a national name for himself.
Maybe don't have like a placeholder talk at your thing if you want to have like excitement, you know?
Well, one thing I've read over and over and over again is like, you know, like if this guy was such a non-entity, why did he become such a star? A point that I would like to make is that everyone agreed the guy was very charismatic. He was very personable, not the sharpest tool in the drawer, but you know, he was very presentable. And here's a thing that is also kind of important, but also confusing. Everyone seems to think this guy was really handsome. And I don't know if you look up pictures of the guy, which I see you're doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like, man, this guy is such a stunner. Oh, he's so handsome. Everything I read talked about how handsome this guy is. I'm like, I don't see it, but you know, like maybe he was like for the time handsome, or like maybe he's politician handsome. You know, I think that still exists to this day.
I mean, people took less vitamins back then, so I got to assume like their skin wasn't as nice as ours is now. So yeah, like for the time, it's kind of like going to Walmart at 2 a.m. You're automatically the most attractive person there.
I used to work at Walmart, so I mean, I was like, damn, I am like a Walmart 7.
You're a Walmart night shift 8.
Exactly. So the guy, his appearance and his presentation are what really made him stand out. Because by all accounts, he wasn't very smart. He had very little principle to him. But a guy named Harry Dougherty, who was considered to be a kingmaker in the Ohio Republican Party, saw this guy and said, he looks like a president. So when it came time for 1920s presidential election, his name was thrown into the hat, and this was not something he wanted. So for the second president in a row, we have someone who did not want to be president. However, the Republican Party wanted him to be president, and the person's wife wanted to be first lady. This was the big deal at the time. It was, you know, and I don't think we've discussed Florence Harding nearly enough, and especially considering what an important role she's going to play in his presidency and his legacy. Florence Harding was a very strong-headed woman. She was a suffragette. She didn't wear her wedding ring. She didn't think she should be defined by her marriage. And she also enjoyed jazz music. So, you know, she seems like a cool person to hang around. She also believed in clairvoyance.
Oh.
By the way, I want to, produce an HBO miniseries about this family because they were insane. And there's so many different characters and so many, Boardwalk Empire included several of these characters on their show. So Florence Harding sought out the aid of a psychic. I'm not kidding. So Madame Marcia, and I definitely clarified the pronunciation of her name because it looks like Madame Marcia, but it's Madame Marcia, had predicted while he was still a senator that if Warren G. Harding got the Republican nomination, that he would get elected president. However, he would not survive his first term.
That sucks.
And that he would be poisoned. It'd be a death by murder.
That's so much worse.
I know. Can you imagine if you were like Warren G. Harding and your wife's like, oh yeah, by the way, you're going to become president, but you're going to die.
I would get a divorce.
That would probably be a good call.
And go to the monastery and be like, do you guys need a gardener? I don't know what I'm doing, but there's less poison here, presumably. I've never been to a monastery, but my wife's crazy, so I need to go. My fictional wife, not my real wife. My real wife is lovely and amazing and not a murderer at all.
So a couple of very important things happened prior to Warren G. Harding becoming president, which is that women get the right to vote and alcohol, it gets banned in the country. Yeah, There are so many interesting parallels, and we'll get to it, between the temperance movement and outlawing of marijuana in most states right now.
Yeah.
So I'm always fascinated by what it was, that the step between like forgettable politician who used to be the editor of a newspaper marrying to becoming president of the United States. So at the Republican National Convention, when they're deciding who was going to be the nominee that year, Warren G. Harding was considered to be a long shot that year. However, again, Harry Dougherty, the kingmaker of Ohio, said this is the guy. And at the very 11th hour, they decided through a smoke room session that, you know what, this is the guy that we're going to put up. And the reason why they picked him is simultaneously that, again, the guy sounded like a president. He looked like a president. He was from an important state. But they could push him on a campaign of a return to normalcy. If you are a 20th century history buff, you will know that in 1920, it was immediately following World War I, or as it was known at the time, the Great War. Woodrow Wilson had been president. He was a very thorough president, but he oversaw a lot of like important moments in the early 20th century. So there's something exciting about a president who is kind of boring, who has just, boring is delightful. So they actually campaigned on the let's get back to boring after the Great War.
Was this because wasn't the Great War and the Spanish influenza outbreak, like, didn't it correspond? Like, weren't guys in the trenches of the war also dying of influenza while the Germans hit them with the mustard gas? Like, that
is actually, no, it wasn't just the guys in the trenches. That's a great point, is that in addition to the Great War, they had just overcame the worst pandemic that that the world had seen at the time. Yeah. If you don't know about the Spanish influenza, it likely originated in America because of World War I, and because it was the Great War in which all these countries were involved. It spread like wildfire and killed more people than the bubonic plague did. However, since there was a war going on, nobody but Spain was reporting on it because everyone tried to keep the hype up. That is why it's called the Spanish influenza, everybody. Spain got blamed because they weren't involved in World War One.
Oh, that's so funny.
And it's stuck. As you know, we are still experiencing COVID-19. I've heard people well, we call it the Spanish influenza, and whatever. It's like, yeah, because Spain was willing to report on it and be like, hey, this is flu that's killing like everybody. Whereas the rest of the world's like, no, we're good. We got a war. That's our big priority.
About it.
But when you consider that there was a global pandemic and a war like no one had seen before, they wanted boring. Boring was very exciting. And Warren G. Harding's campaign was a return to normalcy. And trust me, there was a lot to Warren G. Harding's campaign. So this was a time when, first up, he worked for a newspaper. So the guy knew how to work the press and get good publicity. So he and his wife and Harry Dougherty, he was going to be a very important person in this entire legacy. They knew that they could get celebrities involved. So this was a time when celebrity endorsements weren't really a thing. The film industry was exploding at the time. So they were able to get Al Jolson, Mary Pickford, and Douglas Fairbanks, the biggest stars at the time, to come to Ohio and go on his front porch and be like, we like this guy. They were people recording songs about him. And he was known for his front porch campaigning. Yeah, this is before cable news. So the guy would stand on his front porch and give big speeches. And people would come to Marion, Ohio to hear those speeches from his front porch. Another person that I know Benjamin Harrison did the same thing.
Sure.
So the front porch campaigning. And he was extremely popular. So in the 1920 election, he won 60% of the popular vote. Now, one thing that Family Guy did right, little cutaway for the 1920 election, where it's a bunch of suffragettes like, women, when you go to the polls, you need to understand one thing and one thing only. Warren G. Harding is so cute.
Yes,
But
I've seen
a
that.
lot of historians have wondered, maybe not the suffragettes, but the fact that it was the first election women could vote in, and in a bit of a sexist image, they had this idea, well, who was the most handsome candidate? And again, for those of you listening, you can make your own opinion about Warren G. Harding's attractiveness, but he did wind up winning by a landslide, despite the fact that, as we pointed out, he didn't really want this. So he gets elected president. He goes to Washington. Well, he was still in Washington. I suppose he was a senator. And he immediately appoints some of the most unqualified people to his cabinet. So Harry Dougherty, his kingmaker, gets appointed to Attorney General. A New Mexico senator, Albert Fall, becomes his Interior Secretary. And his Commerce Secretary was Herbert Hoover.
Wow.
Yeah. But the single most important appointee to his cabinet was his dog, Laddie.
What?
So his dog, Laddie, became a huge star. This was a time before having a pet in the White House was a big deal.
He was the Secretary of Good Boys. I have one quick question for you, and it's backtracking a little bit, Pete. So he campaigned from his front porch.
Yes, he did.
Do you think he just didn't want to go anywhere? Because that's,
Yeah, his laziness does play a part in his presidency.
That's failing upward right there.
So he is this jazz age president. He is someone who both he and his wife know how to talk to the press, and they become very press friendly, unlike Woodrow Wilson and Edith Wilson. They invite people into the White House. They do tours. They're willing to smile for the camera. Another thing that they were doing in the White House was hosting very lavish parties, both that the Americans knew about and the ones they didn't. So alcohol during Prohibition was a little like marijuana today, in that you could have it if you had a note from your doctor and if you had some sort of card for it. So did I mention that his attorney general was crooked and also got him into the White House? So the attorney general, Harry Dougherty, was willing to sell out leases for alcohol during Prohibition and pardons if you got in trouble. Another person that played an important role in the Harding administration was a man named Jesse Smith, or Jess. This was essentially the guy getting them all the booze. He was an important bootlegger who worked at the Justice Department. He shared a hotel room with Harry Dougherty during the administration, which was known as the Lover's Nest. And a lot of people speculate whether or not he and Harry Dougherty were lovers. No judgment. Judgment on the bootlegging, because again, this is a president overseeing Prohibition who's getting drunk in the White House.
Yeah.
By the way, this entire time, Warren G. Harding is experiencing a level of popularity not seen since Abraham Lincoln. He is a wildly beloved president. He's the guy who's playing with his dog in the front porch of the White House this time, not the front porch in Marion, Ohio. But behind the scenes, he was kind of falling apart because he had stocked his entire cabinet with not his entire cabinet, most of his cabinet, a bunch of cronies who were embezzling money. This is following World War I, and they had created the Veterans Bureau.
Sure.
So Florence Harding was very involved with the needs of the veterans. She referred to them as our boys. However, they appointed as director of the Veterans Bureau, precursor to the VA, a guy named Charles Forbes that they met on vacation once. And she really liked him, so she was like, "Oh, make this guy. He seems nice."
Like the cut of his jib. Real quick, Pete, was so, and I only know this because I've been to the VA and it's getting big bold letters. And there's a quote from Abraham Lincoln when they established the VA for him who bore in the battle and his widow and his children, or something like that. So Warren G. Harding, for our listeners who might not know, didn't establish the Veterans Affairs Administration, right? They just reformed it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I was gonna say, with all things VA, I will refer to you. For those of you who don't know, Derwin is a genuine veteran, whereas I'm just a veteran to be.
Veteran in training.
Yeah, veteran in training, exactly. That's beautiful. So Charles Forbes had promised to oversee the Veterans Bureau and reform it and make it better. But if you thought the VA kind of sucks now, you should have seen it back in the 20s. So of the 300,000 wounded veterans from the Great War, only 47,000 of them were willing to actually received entitlements. Where did the rest of that money go? To Charles Forbes' pocket. He embezzled $2 million in 1920 money.
That's a lot of money.
Dude got rich.
Yeah.
Another person who got rich during the Harding administration was his Interior Secretary, Albert Fall. Derwin, what do you know about the Teapot Dome scandal?
Ooh, the name is familiar, but high school was a long time ago.
Yeah, that's most people. I'm not going to take the smug approach of, I've always known about the Teapot Dome scandal. The Teapot Dome scandal was the Watergate of its time. And again, it falls into could be very boring because it involves the Interior Department. We discussed this a lot last week because the only interesting scandal of the Taft administration did involve the Interior Department. But this time around, Albert Fall was this senator from the new state of New Mexico who bought a big sprawling ranch and could not afford it. So what he did as Interior Secretary was that he had a no-bid leasing out of the Teapot Dome location in Wyoming. So it was the reason why it's called Teapot Dome is that there's a set of rocks in this spot in Wyoming that I guess people thought looked like a teapot. That's where the name comes from. However, it was a oil reserve that was set aside for the Navy in case there was another war broke out. It was like, all right, well, this is a spot that we can, this set aside for the Navy. There were also oil reserves in California that were being set up just in case another war happened, because this was the time that we were switching from a coal-based Navy to an oil-based Navy. Albert Fall, who was not an environmentalist and I guess apparently didn't like the Navy very much, decided to sell out those locations to private companies, which I actually found out would have been legal had he actually done a bidding war for the spots. So I guess the U.S. government didn't like the Navy either.
I mean, the war is over, so they're downsizing.
Thankfully, there wasn't a World War II to worry about. The Great War ended all wars.
They don't think that far ahead.
Yeah, exactly. It was it was a good time to be alive. It was the Jazz Age.
Yeah. And nothing bad was coming in 1929.
Exactly. Well, you know who would not live to see that time? Warren G. Harding or most of these people I've referenced.
Wow.
I know, it's going to get dark soon,
live
everybody.
fast, die hard, man.
So I would like to take a second to shout out a thing about Warren G. Harding that I do really respect. In 1921, the same year that he got sworn in as president, Harding went to give a big speech in Birmingham, Alabama.
Okay.
This is the most segregated city in the country. He goes there to give this big, friendly, puff piece speech to a segregated audience. And instead, what did he do? He gave a speech, admittedly one that hasn't aged entirely well, empowering Black voters. And the part that hasn't aged well is he specifically said he didn't believe in equality. He said, remove equal from the equation. I see the look on your face. Yeah, I know. But he was also saying that we need to do things like give more money to Black colleges. We need to ensure that if there is a fit Black voter, to make sure that they have every right to vote. And if there's an unfit white voter, to make sure that they cannot vote. And the speech was very controversial at the time, but very popular with the Black people in attendance who heard this speech and was like, wait, did a president just acknowledge that we're like
Humans.
true Americans? Yeah.
People.
And it was a very progressive moment. Like Derwin and I have discussed this offline, how even the presidents who like ran on the progressive ticket weren't going out there to an audience in Birmingham, Alabama in 1921 to speak directly to Black voters and encourage them to vote.
Yeah, I mean, by today's standards, like today, you're expected to go to like African American churches and you know, like you're supposed to go there and like shake hands and everything. But at the time, we can look back at it through our own lens of like, oh, it's way different than today. But at the time, it was revolutionary, you know.
A couple of ramifications of that big progressive speech is that the KKK, who the previous administration was just fine with, started a rumor that he was a member to discredit him. And they also started a rumor that he was black.
So
now, the was Warren G. Harding black conspiracy theories still kind of persist to this day, even though DNA tests have said he's not.
I mean, so he's both black and a Klansman?
He was, he was the Black Klansman before Spike Lee made that movie.
I guess it's probably where Dave Chappelle got the idea. Wow. Man, the Klan,
there's a lot to unpack there.
The Klan has always sucked.
The whole is Warren G. Harding black thing, it simultaneously kept his father-in-law from wanting him and Florence to get married, and was also used against him in the 1920 election.
But I mean, if you
I know.
Dumb.
It's weird, it's dumb, and people were dumber back then.
I mean, also, yeah, it's, if you look at it from like, if you look at his speech and you're like, oh, that was him just speaking to African Americans like they're human beings, was revolutionary at the time. So there's going to be some stupid pushback. So I get that.
Yeah. So that's the one nice thing I have to say about Warren G. Harding. Now, what was it that you said you knew about Warren G. Harding at the start of the show?
I want to say some sort of dick joke because he's got hard in the middle of his name, but I can't think of anything.
Well, let's go ahead and start discussing Warren G. Harding's dick, because it was very important. So, even when he was just the editor of the Marion Star, the dude cheated on his wife constantly. When he became a senator, he cheated on his wife even more. One of those people was a woman named Nan Britton, who was a huge Warren G. Harding fangirl, and continued that affair into the White House. Yeah, if you read anything about Warren G. Harding, you will know that relationship, because they would do it in the Oval Office, and the Secret Service would be on guard to make sure that Florence didn't find them. When he was running for, I know it's really uncomfortable.
That's the most like white trash thing I've ever heard.
White trash with power of the Secret Service. So
it's I'm sorry. That's just
you are welcome. That's amazing. That's one of my favorite facts, and this is the reason why, if Warren G. Harding is known for anything, it's for his sex life.
Billy, Timmy, watch the door.
So he and Florence never had any kids of their own. They had their fur baby, Laddie the dog, but he did have a child with Nan Britton, which they had to, of course, keep hush-hush and keep from the public because this guy was a popular president. The child he had with Nan Britton may not even be the only child out of wedlock that he had. So all of these scandals are starting to slowly bubble to the surface. He and Florence knew the press game, but they weren't that... No one's perfect. So the press, as early as 1922, the press is starting to investigate things like the Attorney General is taking bribes. The Director of the Veterans Bureau is taking bribes. And then, of course, the Teapot Dome scandal. But it's not widespread yet. The guy's still an immensely popular president. At the same time, all that this is happening, Warren G. Harding and Florence are both having their own respective health problems. It's the toll of all the scandal, not to mention all of that Prohibition era booze that they're drinking, is taking its toll on their kidneys and whatnot. So Charles Sawyer becomes the personal physician for both the president and the first lady. He's also a homeopath, which means he ain't very good. So in order to get away and relax, and also to get away from Washington to avoid the incoming scandal that's going to destroy everyone's legacy, they go on a tour which is known as the Voyage of Understanding. It's this whole widespread train trip across the country and also into other countries. Warren G. Harding, I found out, became the first U.S. president to visit Canada. But the reason why they were going through Canada was to get to the then territory of Alaska. So Warren G. Harding is the first president to visit Alaska. During that trip, however, Warren G. Harding became very sick, and his personal physician, the guy who defended his mother's honor and all that good stuff, incorrectly diagnosed him as having food poisoning from eating crab on this trip to Alaska. And that's how he treated him. He treated him as food poisoning. What we know now is that he likely had congestive heart failure at the time.
Oh, no.
Which was exacerbated by the fact that the guy is stressed out over the fact that he appointed so many of these corrupt people to his cabinet who are just doing everything they can to get rich in the jazz age.
Look, man, like if you get out of the trailer park, right, you gotta like leave your trailer park friends behind, because that's what I did. I left my trailer park friends behind. You can't just like hire your friends from back home. You gotta start over, man. You gotta be a whole new person.
So you're saying if you got elected president of the bowling league, as we know you aspire to, you wouldn't appoint all of your Indiana gang to your administration?
I would change my name legally, so that way they couldn't find me. And also too, I would not appoint a hippie to be my doctor. I would find a board certified physician. I want someone who's held a heart beating in his hands. That's the guy I want, right? I want somebody who treated gunshot wounds and Spanish flu in the trenches of France, right, on the Western Front during the war for 3 years. That's my guy, because that guy can like not only treat whatever's going on, but he could stab an assassin. You know, he's seen.
I think things. You're insane. Bring some healing crystals to me. I'll be just fine.
I was a combat medic for 13 years, Pete. I have a lot of tourniquets in the house, but no healing crystals.
So we are almost done with the life of Warren G. Harding. He's making the trip on the West Coast, south, and it gets so severe that they stop in a hotel in San Francisco, and because they have a lot of doctors there who can actually treat him, as opposed to Charles Sawyer, who was like, I'm not kidding. Charles Sawyer's approach to his heart problems was to give him tons and tons of laxative.
Oh,
just
no.
Shit out the sick right there.
Oh, no, that's not how CHF works.
Yeah,
like
presidents shitting themselves to death is going to become a reoccurring theme on our podcast.
Because this is all that I know, but I know that your blood travels in your body in a certain order through certain places. It goes in, and then CHF is when it backs up and it just kind of fills up your lungs and then you're drowned. So
he's in a hotel being treated by some actual doctors. Unfortunately, they start treating him too late. And from what I've read, and by the way, there is a great book out there for those of you interested in a little more thorough history of Warren G. Harding and his associates, called The Bloviator by Jim Yoakum. And in the book, Jim Yoakum discusses that no one really knows, well, at least no one can settle on one story about the day Harding died. Everyone involved has a different story. All that is known that at some point it seems that he had a fatal heart attack. But who was in the room with him? What were the circumstances of the heart attack? And was anything done to treat him? What is known is that Florence Harding opted out of him getting an autopsy and immediately within an hour of his death got him embalmed and made up and put in a coffin to be sent across the country to DC.
Well, that is suspect.
It is. Time is a flat circle, because all of the memes that you have seen on the internet about Hillary Clinton, those apply to Florence Harding. I mean, she was an internet meme before an internet meme.
Hillary ain't got nothing on Florence.
Well, yeah, because Florence Harding was accused of killing her husband in order to save him from scandal. It didn't work, by the way, and we'll get to that. So Charles Sawyer, who was the homeopathic doctor who may have misdiagnosed him when he could have been treated for his heart problems. Again, it was congestive heart failure, so it wasn't like today we still have a tough time treating that. And then we've got Florence Harding, who, did she poison her husband? Unlikely, but people still spread the rumor. And it is weird that she opted out of him getting an autopsy or getting a death mask, and immediately was like, "Unball him. Just, it's cool. He's dead. Let's move on. Let's move on." So at the time, America was devastated. This was a wildly beloved man.
Really?
And oh yeah, even with all the controversies, even with the big "I don't hate black people" speech in Birmingham, Alabama, the guy was still very popular. He was polling extremely well at the time because the scandals hadn't entirely blown up yet, and the nation went into mourning. And then the scandals started to really surface themselves up, specifically the ones involving Albert Fall, our Interior Secretary, and the Teapot Dome scandal. He and Harry Daugherty, his attorney general, both got indicted. Charles Forbes, our director of Veterans Bureau, actually went to jail as well because that whole embezzling $2 million from veterans funds. The Teapot Dome scandal went on for years and years and years. So Warren G. Harding died in 1923, and Albert Fall did not get his guilty verdict until 1929 and became the first member of a presidential cabinet to get indicted and go to jail. So both Charles Forbes and Albert Fall went to prison for about a year. Again, even if you get arrested for embezzling money, you're still only going to get a slap on the wrist, according to our Justice Department. The guys were connected. Another important thing that happened that completely tarnished Warren G. Harding's reputation is that, hey, did I mention that Warren G. Harding liked to cheat on his wife a lot?
Oh, yeah.
So at the time, that was a very big deal, specifically because Nan
Really?
Britton, I'm actually kind of surprised that people cared as much as they did. But we both lived through the, Monica Lewinsky controversy. So we
Sure.
know that there's a precedence for people getting upset about presidents cheating on their wives.
Sure.
But Nan Britton had been receiving money to support her child while Warren G. Harding was still alive. And then when he died, everyone kind of cut ties with her. So she published a book called The President's Child, in which she talked about the fact that, hi, the president knocked me up. I have a kid. He never met the kid. And I'm trying to raise it as a woman in the 20s. So
It's 1920. I'm not allowed to work without my father's permission or something.
Yeah. So she did what any, smart person would do. She wrote a tell-all novel about it.
I'd get
So
paid.
I don't blame her. She got a kid. That's expensive. So that kind of explains, for those of you who are history, at least aspiring history nerds like us, why Warren G. Harding is considered one of, if not our worst president. And Warren G. Harding is my favorite kind of bad president because he didn't start any wars. He didn't get hundreds of thousands of people killed. He was just someone who was put in place to be a puppet president for a bunch of crooked people.
He was just kind of a dirtbag.
He's kind of a dirtbag. He's a hilarious dirtbag.
I love that that's the bar. Like, listen, he didn't start a war. Like, so, I mean, yeah, people got embezzled, but
we are going to discuss some horrible presidents who did start wars.
I'm so excited.
Who did tank the economy.
I'm so excited.
Oh, it's going to get fun. But this guy, I mean, he's an entertainingly bad president, not a sad. Well, I mean, his life was a little sad, but not like he didn't devastate the country the way that others. Essentially, what he did was he caused a lot of Americans to distrust their government. So I suppose in that regard, he did some good.
I mean, isn't that kind of our default setting? Like, that's kind of baked into the Constitution.
It's our default setting now. But back in the 20s, people were optimistic.
So, and again, you've done more research in the civilian. Most of my history is more military based. Isn't kind of a general distrust of authority baked into, or distrust into man-made governing bureaucratic authority baked into the Constitution of the United States? And like, if you read like the early founding documents, they're like, why would we listen to other people? We're gonna do everything ourselves. So
because this guy had the support of Al Jolson, and he had an adorable dog.
There you go. And everyone liked him on the front. God, you know what? I get it. He's a placeholder. Everyone had just went through like a horrific, like 5 or 10 years. The ones that didn't die from the mustard gas died from the flu. and the ones who didn't die from that are all like PTSD'd and weird. And so they just want like a handsome guy to play with the dog on the front porch and not really think too much about it. I get it. That makes a lot of sense. Like, I would be there too.
Oh yeah, I mean, there were a lot of very smart people behind this very dumb guy that they put up front. All right, now we get to the most important topics of this podcast. Now, we know, because of Nan Britton's tell-all novel and because of all the love letters that got published after his death, that Warren G. Harding nicknamed his penis Jerry. If you are a fan of Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, you know all about Jerry. That has become up several times on his show. But I don't think he was very imaginative with the nickname for his penis. And on this show, we are imaginative. So, Derwin, what do you think Warren G. Harding should have nicknamed his penis?
The Hard Warrior.
That's a good pick. Now, mine was, he was the editor of the Marion Star. I think he should have nicknamed his penis the Marion Bar.
Well done. Well done.
We are more creative than the 29th president of the United States.
Neither one of us are president, though, so, you know.
Fine by me.
Maybe I should, like, I don't know, hit my head a couple more times and dumb it down a shade, and I don't know.
All right, and the last question we've got is, do you think Warren G. Harding deserves a better reputation as president?
Doesn't sound like it. Sounds like, I mean, like you said, he didn't get us involved in any stupid wars, so that's cool. He's sounds like a placeholder guy, you know, like, and God bless him, you know, he's a placeholder. That's fine.
Like, my own opinion is, from what I've read, I don't think he was our worst president. No. You know, that high praise that is, but he's our worst president that's fun to make fun of.
Oh yeah. Like, yeah. I like that. He's our worst president who's the most fun to make fun of. That's good.
Like, we're going to get to some worst presidents who's just kind of cataclysmic.
Yeah.
By the way, I didn't even mention the dead hooker.
Oh, well, let's wrap up there. Tell me about the dead hooker.
All right. Pete. And to clarify, and for the sake of the fact that this was an actual woman, it is not settled on whether or not she was a hooker or she was just a chorus dancer. I feel like the hooker thing may have just been embellished, but, you know, whatever she did for her money, the point is, she and a bunch of other women of her ilk, in terms of how they made money, were at the Lover's Nest with Attorney General Harry Dougherty and his best friend, Jess Smith, with Harding, and they were all getting drunk on Prohibition alcohol, and someone threw a bottle at this woman's head, and they immediately pulled the president out of that room, got him like all covered up, like, okay, just go away, you were never here. And that woman died in the hospital shortly after.
Oh,
so
no. That's so dark.
And naturally, that's the note we end this podcast on.
We're gonna end it on dead strippers. Good job, Pete.
She was a dead dancer. I feel like we can kind of just settle on that one.
Okay, dead dancer. Regardless, she got hit with a. Oh man. Yeah, no, it's probably good we don't remember this guy.
Yeah,
he's probably...
but he had such a good boy dog.
You know, we should have elected the dog.
You know what? Oh, I didn't even mention that Florence Harding and Charles Sawyer both died within a year of Harding, and Charles Sawyer died while Florence Harding was visiting him. Hashtag Charles Sawyer didn't kill himself.
Oh, he got Epsteined.
Oh, he totally got Epstein. Did Florence get Epstein too, I guess, because she also died shortly after?
I mean,
the point is, a lot of people died very shortly after Harding.
You can't have witnesses. That's just sloppy.
Oh, yeah. So that wraps up another episode of the Dead President Society podcast. I'm Pete Barlow.
I'm Derwin Lester.
And thank you for joining us.
Good night, Pete.